Hi, my name is Michael Chikeen. The smartest people I've met have one common belief, that us silly humans really don't know much. For example, we still don't know why planes stay in the air, or how Tylenol or even gravity works. Yeah, gravity. Look it up. In today's distracted, clickbait, misinformation age, I wish we could all be less certain, more humble, and a lot more curious. Admittedly, I've been known to struggle with all three. So no more, no less, this show is my attempt to be that change. Thanks for joining me, and here we go. Hey everybody, welcome back to No More, No Less. I'm Michael Chikeen, and today in the virtual studio, I have with me John Pabone. John has spent 2 decades trying to make a positive impact on Earth. After leaving his role at the UN, John traveled the world studying the impacts of sustainability firsthand, in factories, on fields, and at Fortune 500s. After a decade of experience living and working in Asia, he founded Fulcrum Strategic Advisors, with a mission to help organizations and individuals capitalize on the benefits of sustainability. John is the chair of the Conference Board's Asia Sustainability Leaders Council, a member of the UN Association of Australia, and serves on the board of advisors to the U.S. Green Chamber of Commerce. He's the author of Sustainability for the Rest of Us, your no bullshit 5-point plan for saving the planet, and also the Great Greenwashing, how brands, governments, and influencers are lying to you. So I'm genuinely pumped to discuss all things sustainability, and so I can find out exactly why I'm right that everyone is lying to me. John Pabone, welcome to the show.
Thanks for the intro. Really appreciate it.
I guess I want to start, what your superhero origin story is. What was the nexus point in your life that kind of sent you on a trajectory of sustainability and that I want to help the planet?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure my therapist has tried to tease this out of me as to what that inflection point was sometime in my life, but I don't think we've ever gotten there. But certainly started my career, as you mentioned, working at the UN. So that bit of do good for the world altruism was always part of what I've wanted to do. And then I left the UN and I moved to Shanghai, but I had to figure out a way to use that public sector knowledge and experience that I gained at the UN in a very commercial city. Shanghai is capitalism on steroids. So they don't care about the floofy do good for the earth stuff. They care about making money. And so that's how I fell into sustainability. And my part of the sustainability universe really is the intersection of the doing good, the altruism, but working primarily with private sector companies. So that kind of capitalist part of sustainability as well. And that was sort of the origin story.
Gotcha. Okay. Before we get into China, because I'd love to cover that, I'd like to take a step back and go to the UN for a second, because obviously you have people that believe it's a wonderful organization doing a lot of good things. I'm one of those people. And then you have people on the other side that think, oh, the UN is useless, no one listens to it, and all these things. And I think with any giant institution, I think it's a little bit of both. And so I was wondering if you could give us a little perspective on your time there and what you think of the UN.
You're spot on that it is a combination of both of those things. And I talk about this quite a bit with folks. And the way I like to frame it is that think of what the world would be like without the United Nations as a starting point. And I don't think we would be having this conversation now, because the world probably would have nuked itself 10 times over if the UN was never created. So in that sense, the UN's done an amazing job at getting people in the room to talk to each other. And for those who maybe aren't into international politics or diplomacy, might think that's a silly thing, but it makes a world of difference getting countries like the United States, Iran, North Korea, and France all talking to each other. It may not be perfect, but it's certainly a forum that allows for that, and that gets us across the line in so many different ways. But on paper, you probably could not create an organization less useful than the United Nations. It thrives on bureaucracy. It's what keeps it around. And because of that, it's so slow to do anything. And I think at a time when it was created 70 plus years ago, that worked, because the world wanted stability. We just came out of 2 world wars. We wanted things just to be level set and things to be expected instead of surprises. And it worked in that sense. But as time's gone on, the UN has been tasked with really meeting more rapid fire events, things that are happening in real time, and it's not made to do that. I wish it was evolved and adapted to the modern world, but in a lot of ways it's not fit for purpose. So going back to that original thought, it's a combination of both. It does a lot of amazing things and I'm glad it exists, but there's a lot of reform that needs to happen for it to really be purpose built for society today and what we need.
Wow, that was so comprehensive. I appreciate that because I guess, yeah, just thinking of that simple idea of just having people from these different nations, like an ambassador or whatever, just in the room together to start a dialogue to bring back to their countries to say that, this country isn't the other. I had a talk with this person and they're trying to find solutions. Maybe starts a dialogue before breakdown can even start to happen. So I guess since you see the value of it, but a lot of these institutions become bloated over time and unfortunately become their own worst enemy. What could be like the 80-20 thing or the lowest hanging fruit that you think would help the UN move in a more productive direction? What could they do?
So what I'm going to say is not the easy solution, but it is the solution that needs to happen. There needs to be reform at the Security Council. That's the only way anything is going to move forward, because the way the organization's created, the Security Council holds all the cards. The members that have the veto power have all the power at the organization. Yeah, the General Assembly can do what it wants and talk about resolutions that are non-binding, but at the end of the day, the Security Council has control over whether or not the UN sends peacekeeping troops out. It has control over the budget, but ultimately the Security Council is responsible for any changes to how the organization works. So until that's reformed, where you don't have 5 members, which essentially are the ones that won World War II, and the post-colonial powers, quite a few of them, until we don't have them making all the decisions and tying the hands of the other 180 some odd countries that are in the United Nations, we're probably not going to get anywhere. So that's the starting point. But that's probably been a conversation since day one of the UN that really hasn't evolved. There's been talks of how to change the Security Council, how to get rid of the veto power, how to bring new permanent members in, but it really hasn't gone anywhere. So again, that's the solution, but that's not the easy solution.
Wow. Okay. I guess a good pivot for that is, I guess, a bit analogous as how the UN is for peace and diplomacy. It seems China is for sustainability, whereas like they're this gigantic beast. And I saw in your bio and from your website that China is this leader in sustainability, but you talk to other people and, anecdotally, it's this giant polluting factory that is capitalism over anything else, really, which creates more waste. So how can China be a leader in sustainability and also this giant plastic monster?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to frame a bit, because if you ask 5 people to define sustainability, you'll probably get 100 answers. For me, sustainability really is an umbrella catch-all term for anything that helps to build a better future, whether that's for the environment, which gets the lion's share of the PR and the media attention. That's one part of it. But there's also the social side of sustainability, so human rights, labor rights, animal rights, all that sort of stuff. And then you have an entire area devoted to governance and transparency and greenwashing. So it's quite multifaceted. It's not just hugging the trees, saving the polar bears. There's a lot more to it. And when it comes to sustainability overall, my viewpoint is that it's really important we're focused more on moving the needle in the right direction, these incremental steps, versus sitting back and waiting for things to be perfect, because that's never going to happen. So we work within the system we have. We look at these small incremental steps. I wish things would go faster, but this is kind of where we are. So noting where positive change is happening. Going back to the question about China. So China is this massive battleship in the water that is trying to turn itself around. It's going to take a minute. And a lot of people are not patient, particularly when it comes to a place that they really don't understand too well. So they're wanting China to fix everything right away, and that's not going to happen. It's not realistic in the sense of the capitalist socialist model that they have, or indeed the way the world works in general. It wouldn't happen in any of the other countries, so it's not fair to expect China to be able to do that either. But the one thing China has that a lot of, well, all Western democracies do not have is they're a command and control economy. So if the government says something is going to happen, it happens. And back in, it would have been 2012, 2013, they made a very concerted decision to say, yep, we're focusing on sustainability and becoming a greener country, and they've been so public with that it's highly unlikely they're going to step back from any of those goals they set for themselves. I think China is one of the few countries that, while not on track, they are the closest to meeting their Paris climate targets, which come up in 2025. They have done amazing amounts of work, certainly in investment around green technology and infrastructure. I think the last statistics, and this is all pre-COVID because COVID kind of screwed everything up for everybody, but pre-COVID, they were investing more every year into green technology than the entire EU combined. And that's because they have access to that capital to be able to do that. And combined with the willingness of the command and control government, all of these things get fast tracked. You can look at it a lot in the sense of, I think a lot of people know sort of how the public transport system has grown so quickly across a lot of China, the high-speed rail and how many lines are being built every year. And again, while not perfect, it's certainly a move in the right direction and going faster than a lot of Western democracies, including my own country, the United States, is going. So those are all things going in the right direction. Again, not perfect. And then on the social side of things, really looking at how they're improving factory conditions, labor conditions, all of that stuff contributes to what I think is really one of the leaders around the world when it comes to sustainability and innovations in sustainability. My wish and my hope is that more people would look to China, not as, again, being perfect, but certainly as somewhere they can look for lessons and learnings to then apply into their own countries. Remember, at the end of the day, China is one of the biggest polluters, if not the biggest polluter overall, but we're all on the same rock. And so if you look at it really critically, China probably wouldn't be as polluting if those of us in other countries weren't demanding that they create all the stuff that we think we need. So it's this big circle that everything feeds into everything else. We love to point fingers, but again, we're all sharing this space together and we're all sort of responsible for the things that are happening.
Right. Yeah, this big circle, I would say it looks more like a dumpster fire. But,
certainly.
Because it's, yeah, you're totally right. Because I never, it's so simple. I never thought of it from that perspective that, like, yeah, China does have, I think, 1.3 billion people, but they're the factory for the rest of the world. So if we would enter, especially the Western world, we're such consumers of plastic and garbage, that if we would enter a phase of more minimalism or degrowth, then China would have a better opportunity, to not be such a giant polluter. But I don't even know where to start with that idea because it's so big. It's kind of collapsed in my head already. Whereas, are any of these conversations happening as far as degrowth? Because if you talk to anyone on Wall Street or anyone honestly that has a finance job, you talk about the idea of degrowth being a good thing, and their brain breaks where, like, they think that if you're not growing, you're dying, and that's a popular phrase. And I think that is so insane. Like, if you look at even Japan right now, after their gigantic collapse from their real estate market, I think in the 80s maybe, like, it's not like that country died. Like, people still have jobs, they have their own problems, they're still working towards them, but, like, people still have good lives there, and it's a very well functioning society for anyone that's been there. So, like, can you speak a little bit to what you think of degrowth and if any of these conversations are happening anywhere yet?
Yeah, absolutely. So and I hate to call it a buzzword because it doesn't really give it justice, but degrowth is certainly a major part of conversations that are happening at the private sector level. So that's excluding all the finance people because they're in a different world that's not based at all in the current reality. And also consumers are asking for this. So whether that's degrowth or more conscious consumption, there's a real palpable shift over the last 5 years towards things like that. But of course, that's butting up against, again, that reality. And the reality is that the people paying for this stuff that are financing it all are asking for growth and growth and growth. Eventually, we're going to get to a point where that's impossible because we'll run out of resources. I would hope, and I don't know if this is the case, but I would hope that those finance people that are running the show are risk averse enough and intelligent enough to recognize that that point of being unable to grow will eventually happen, the material risk of that. And I approach everything very much from a dollars and cents perspective. It's not, I wouldn't ever call myself an activist or anything like that. It's all very practical. So running up against the material risk of not being able to grow because you've run out of resources is something they should be considering in the financial sector. In the private sector, in business, particularly fast moving consumer goods and the like, they're certainly looking at the limits of growth. A very sizable portion of companies have entered a virtuous cycle where they're now competing on being truly sustainable, not just saying they are because it's the right thing to say, but recognizing the business imperative of being sustainable over time and what good that can do for their business. So, as an example, shoring up supply chain and logistics, right? A major part of sustainability and helping out the environment. But at the end of the day, it's great for the bottom line. So smart businesses are already doing that and have been doing that for a while. If I had a crystal ball, I would venture to guess that in 10 or 15 years' time, those companies that either are very late to the game or refuse to play ball are not really going to be around much longer. There will be some, right, in the super polluting industries and things of that nature. But from a consumer goods perspective, the market won't stand for it. So one of the few silver linings of capitalism is that businesses respond to what the market wants. The market does not want hyper polluting companies that are bad for their people and bad for workers. So things will kind of figure themselves out. Unfortunately, like with everything else over the past 10 years, we're kind of stuck during a transition phase instead of being able to see, what's going to happen at the end of it.
Right. Yeah. Is there anything that you would say we would like people that are like, I'm all for sustainability, but obviously not in it, like yourself. Is there anything that you could tell us that's surprising about the movement? Because you look on social media, I see gigantic countries of plastic. You see that we're cutting down so many trees without really replacing them. There are governments in charge that really don't give a shit, and they continue to do all these things. Like it looks quite dire. Not to mention like the sea temperatures, the ice sheets, like all these things. And I'm not even that well read on it, and I just listed 10 things that are awful. So is there any like positive things that you're seeing for the movement to give us a little bit of hope?
Yeah, absolutely. And the hope that I see and what gets me out of bed in the morning to continue doing my job, because let's be honest, my job and my colleagues, we push shit uphill every single day. So there has to be a reason for us to get out of bed or we would stop doing it. And there's plenty of that. But everything you mentioned is 100% true. So I'm not going to sugarcoat things and say that everything is going to be fine, because it's not. And we know that. So there's no point, pretending and deceiving ourselves that things are going to be okay. They're not. We'll be okay as humanity. The Earth will be okay. It will adapt. We will all have to adapt, and the adaptations are already happening, whether that's through infrastructure or how we live our daily lives. So things will not be the same. That's just how it's going to be. We're not going to in the same way. And I think a lot of people have this misguided notion that when we talk about building a sustainable future, we're trying to get back to like having an agrarian society and living off the grid and all of these pastoral scenes. And that's not the reality either. So where are we going to go? I don't know. It's going to be somewhere between living on a kibbutz and Mad Max. That's kind of where we'll end up in the not too distant future. But to the hopeful message, it's somewhere in between. I don't know where on that scale. But the hopeful message is that things are changing and that there's still plenty of runway to continue to adapt. I really do not want people to fall into this what we call a doomist mentality, which is sort of like everything is screwed, I might as well give up. And there are a lot of people that would like you to do that. A lot of the messages we see, particularly on social media, with a lot of these stats and just really terrible stories, funny enough, they're actually coming from organizations like big oil companies and gas companies and mining companies. They're feeding this into social media to basically make us give up. So let's fight back against that. None of that gives you a hopeful message, which is what you asked for. But my thing, and I had mentioned this earlier, is that the things I am seeing with the businesses I'm working with day in and day out is they have entered that virtuous cycle and they are getting better. It does take a lot of patience. In the same sense, we need to be patient with places like China. We need to be patient with private sector industry overall, but they are moving in the right direction, which is what gets me out of bed. And I hope that's enough to give people a little glimmer of hope to keep doing all the amazing things that they're doing in their individual lives, whether that's through their consumption or through I don't know, whatever your passion point is to save the planet, keep doing that. Don't stop, because that's having a major impact as well. My viewpoint, though, and the reason I work with private sector companies is because I feel, A, they got us into the problem, so they should get us out of it. But B, they have access to resources and capital that people just don't have. And as you mentioned earlier, governments really don't care to use. So they're the ones that can
Right.
really get us over the line to building a better future. And I already see them doing that day in and day out. So that's from my little piece of the sustainability universe, the glimmer of hope I hope people will take with them.
Right. Yeah, and I appreciate your candor that like things are not okay, but there are things that are happening. Like, I mean, I wish there was more of a push and people were angrier, because I think it's not even about taking CO2 out of the air. It's like how much we're extracting from the earth, and that like that's going to, in my view, based on no science at all, but it will just help the earth itself get warmer. If we're taking out all of this oil, like there are going to be consequences. And I think we're very short-sighted beings, whereas like you're seeing all of the justified protests and people up in arms about everything that's happening over in Israel right now. And I wonder why we're not doing that every weekend for climate.
It's
Like
an act.
like all of these oil companies and gas companies. Sorry, go ahead.
No. You're absolutely right. It's at the end of the day, whether it's a political issue or it's around building a better environment or sustainability or whatever the cause might be. I think up until recently, it's been a lack of access to information. We've had the internet for
Mm,
what, 20-ish years, but most of that time we've spent watching cat videos. It's only very recently that we've used the internet to really capitalize on proper information, informing ourselves, educating ourselves on things that are going on around the world. And I know for a lot of people, that's super overwhelming, because it was very nice to just hide in your bubble and say, "Oh, I didn't know." But now, with that access to information, we know very well all the conflicts happening right now, and it's not just one particular area. There's many things going on around the world. So with that, even though we're
right,
sort of in that getting overwhelmed phase right now because of the over inundation of information, I'm super hopeful that people will take that. Um, I hate to say like the younger generation, because that absolves anybody else of having to do anything. So I'm not going to say that, but I think they're
yeah,
really leading it, especially with apps like TikTok, which governments in the West absolutely hate. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I think a lot of that is because there's access to so much more information than we ever had before. That is what's going to galvanize people to get up and be active around whatever cause it might be. And we're already seeing that happening. Hopefully, it gets
right.
to the point where there's much more informed information that's getting out, because certainly it's kind of a wild west right now. But we have access to information like never before, and we're capitalizing on it like never before.
Right. Yeah, honestly, that is reassuring, because even it seems like there is a lot of misinformation campaign from your sort of rich libertarian types. I interviewed Carl Safina, the American ecologist, on the podcast not too long ago, and we kind of got into this conversation where he said his next book is going to be a culmination of his work of the last 30, 40 years about human beings and our relationship with the natural world. And he was saying, because of these Abrahamic religions, they've really put human supremacy at the top of the pyramid, that has left us completely disconnected from our environment, from the planet, and how connected we all are to the animals and all of these things. And so it is interesting that I see a lot of people that probably are more along the lines of, white American Christians or very well off, where they're kind of fed this sort of information or theme in their lives where they think that if God wills it to be, then it will be. If he wants to save the planet, it will, and everything's given up to the deity, and then so it leaves us like free to buy more shit on Amazon. And I'm quite guilty of this as well. I try to be better, but I find that really frustrating with even talking to some friends who are otherwise super intelligent and conscious people that are being like, well, this will never happen because we're all like, we're going to demand places like India and China, all these poor people there, to sacrifice to do these things. And it's such like a red herring. What's the term? The not a scarecrow, a straw man argument, where it's like, well, does that mean we should do nothing at all just because like we will have to sacrifice on different areas? Like do you have some of these conversations of like how to combat misinformation and get people like you that know what they're talking about out to say like, yeah, let's do something, come on, like the Greta Thunberg who gets roasted on social media just for being someone who gives a shit about the planet. Like it's infuriating. So I'd like to hear how you guys think about that.
My approach to all, especially when it comes to messaging, because that's a lot of the work that I do is around how to tease out the right messages, is you have to do it in a pragmatic, I call it pragmatic altruism, so a pragmatic way. And I think if it, I would have loved to have been in the room when whatever genius came up with sustainability marketing, and we've done a terrible job at it. It's the burnt out hellscape of an Earth again, the Mad Max. It's the polar bear on the melting ice cap, and what that's done, it's really for a lot of people made them put up their hands and go, well, I'm one of 10 billion people. What am I supposed to do to combat all that? And people just sit on their couch and go, screw it, I'm not going to do anything. So I think really getting the message out, and this even applies to Greta. I don't necessarily support her approach in a lot of ways, and certainly I do not support the approach of organizations like Just Stop Oil or Extinction Rebellion. I think they've forgotten their audience. They're certainly passionate. We can't discount that. They are wearing their heart on their sleeve, but is gluing your face to the street or throwing tomato soup at a painting getting your message across? Probably not. Because at this stage of the game, we've been talking building a better future since the early 60s. That's the start of the modern environmental movement. If at this stage of the game, people do not know what's going on, or they're actively working against trying to build a better future, then I don't know why we are wasting our time trying to convince them. All of that to say, the goal today, it's no more raising awareness. The awareness is out there. Our goal today is to convert people to actually do something. So how do you do that? You meet them where they are and you have an honest conversation with them. You don't try to convince them to do extreme things like going and living off the grid or becoming a vegan. If that's your passion point, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. But for most people around the world, that's not something that they're either going to be willing or have the means to do. So what can they do in their day-to-day lives? How can you get them over the line to actually make a bit of a difference? Going back to that point earlier of moving the needle in the right direction. You don't have to go in an extreme way to build a better future. Every little piece contributes to something. I was in a panel, it would have been about a month ago, and I was sitting next to an individual who was very much of the activist viewpoint when it comes to getting messaging out. And he was very passionate, very angry, very loud. And I said, okay, wait, this is a room of people who've wasted an hour of their lives to come listen to us, so they must care. They're the 1% that care. And I said, okay, those of you in the room, raise your hand if you want to become a vegetarian or if you are. A few people raised their hand. Okay, how about being a vegan? Fewer people. How many of you would give up your cell phone? No hands. How many of you would give up international travel? No hands. Live off the grid? No hands going up. That's the 1% that care. What about the 99% that don't care? So the more we continue to bang on with these very extreme things, these very extreme actions, trying to get them to hang off the side of a whaling ship, the more they're going to see the movement around building a better future as this crazy fringe thing that only crazy fringe people care about. And they're not going to want to be associated with that. Most people that work in the space, they're not activists. They're not hippie dippies. They look like me. they're quote unquote normal people. So I think the more we show our movement to be a fringe thing versus a central thing, the more we're going to turn people off from converting to action overall. That was my soapbox. Right. Sorry.
No, I appreciate that, because I was going to say I think I have a contrarian viewpoint that I'd like to bounce back and forth with you, because I completely see your point of messaging and how you're trying to reach people practically, and I think I want to take two sides of this, or 2 points to come at it, and you can tell me what you think. So one, I would say, like, let's say we're talking about civil rights, and in the U.S., we'll be super specific. I think you had people that were in government and they were policy wonks, and they were looking to make better laws and reduce some of these restrictions on segregation and race and on all these things that were just basically an antiquated part of the system, still grandfathered in from slavery. Those people are working hard and they're making progress. But I think there also was a huge part of the extremist movement, if you want to call it, with riots and protests and people being shot on both sides and things like that I think galvanizes and gets the conversation going with people that are maybe sitting down the sidelines, and it will I think animate part of their feeling on the issue, will make them do something. And I think just like in religion, unfortunately, you don't have the extremists without the moderates holding up that sort of institution. Whereas I don't think we need everyone to go vegan, but if we have people, I put myself in this category. Whereas once I learned about veganism, and I read or watched Game Changers and read some books on it, I don't consider myself vegan or vegetarian, but I think I've reduced my meat consumption by 90%. And so, and I feel much better for it. I'm happy that I did it, and I don't think I'll ever be vegan or vegetarian. So my point would be that, yeah, I don't think anyone should blow up a building or do these things like Extinction Rebellion, but like they make me think of that. I'm glad people are doing these things, that they're this angry, and I hope people get angrier. And maybe it would promote me to go to a protest or do something. And on some level, like if there isn't like people in the Amazon rainforest cutting down trees, like I kind of wouldn't mind if someone goes and disables one of the machinery that's cutting down those trees. So I don't know. I really struggle with this necessity for extremist views when it comes to protecting the planet, and the practical nature that I also agree with everything that you've said. So I'd like to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, it all comes back to this idea of pragmatism, and it's interesting some of the examples you gave, because we're on the same page 100%. The current kind of incarnation, let's call it the Extinction Rebellion folks, and Just Stop Oil is probably a much better example, because while they do have a manifesto and what they're trying to get to, I would question if the tactics they're using are getting them toward that goal. And what I mean by that is,
okay,
I'm all for activism. I am all for even extremism where it's certainly necessary. But I think the difference between this current incarnation of very extremist activist, let's call it antics, and maybe some of the examples you gave before, maybe of the civil rights movement, or a lot of times people compare Just Stop Oil to the suffragettes, which is really interesting. That comes up a lot. The suffragettes were very, very pointed with how they approached any sort of activism or protests that they did. They had their goal in mind of getting straight to politicians. So everything they did worked within that goal. The same thing with the civil rights movement. Anything that any civil rights leaders did was to raise awareness for the different plights of things going on, whether that's in the United States or certainly civil rights around the world. I'm not sure that a lot of the activism that happens today has that goal in mind. It's sometimes a great meeting of the minds. It's, a lot of really witty protest banners, which are fun to read. It might be some people, twirling fire or doing hula hoops or painting their faces. And it eventually devolves into this thing where you go, okay, what is actually going on here? What's the message you're trying to convey? And I think that's the type of activism that I'm talking about. The one where you scratch your head and go, I don't understand. I don't understand why you threw tomato soup on that and what that has to do. Was probably, had they brought in a good PR firm, they probably could have massaged that message of throwing tomato soup onto a painting because of X, Y, or Z. They could have found a way, but they didn't. And so that's the difference between that and maybe what the suffragettes are doing, or certainly what you talked about with the Amazon and a lot of the things happening there, and the disabling of machinery and the blockading of taking down trees. That's the sort of stuff we want to see, because that obviously ties into the point of whatever they're doing. And you look at that and you go, yep, I 100% get what they're doing, and I support that because I understand it. A lot of people might have a cognitive dissonance trying to support a cause that to them doesn't add up when it's going on. So again, the famous example of the tomato soup again, in people's minds, they're going, okay, I want to support you, but I don't get what you're trying to do. And so that's the difference. It comes down to the pragmatic part of it, and does the action match the message that you're trying to convey?
Right. What was the tomato soup thing? I remember someone throwing something at a Van Gogh.
That's the one. Yeah, that was it was 2 years ago, but they've done it a few times. So they like to destroy art.
Was that just because it's was it just because it's an oil painting?
The message in that particular instance, so the one with the Van Gogh, they were talking about food insecurity in the UK. So basically, people not having enough food, and they did that by throwing food at a painting. So see, it's not clever messaging. At least it's not conveyed in a way that people can easily get, and that's what you want, right? You want that witty protest banner coupled with a really smart way to send messaging out.
Right. Oh my gosh, they combined the isolating nature of abstract art with activism, which is hilarious. I had no idea that's what they were trying to say. So I think we definitely are on the same page that in this performative sort of activism, it doesn't make any sense because no one knows what the fuck you're doing.
That's it.
Whereas if it's something that's more extreme, but it's very direct, that like we are doing this because we need a blockade to stop this, and they're the president and the old president Brazil is trying to cut down as many trees as possible because he's a lunatic. Like, okay, I understand that.
And it adds clarity for yourself as well, right? You want clarity in what you're doing, or else why get out of bed in the morning to do it? And I'm not sure that a lot of organizations have that clarity, particularly when it comes to such a massive thing like saving the planet, right? I think that's where we get caught up a lot, and where people throw their hands up and go, forget it, this is too much, is because it's big. Like, how are we supposed to save the planet? What I really advocate for is breaking things down into smaller pieces that are much more manageable. And a great example of that is solving the hole in the ozone layer. That famous story of, that we identified that there was a hole in the ozone layer. Everybody was getting really hot, and we figured out, oh, wait, it's our hairspray and the aerosol products we're using. So we were able to tackle that, get rid of it, have, manufacturers create a new thing where now you have a pump spray instead, and wham, bam, bam, we've sort of fixed the hole. It's still there, but we've done a really good job at fixing it. Right. And I think that's because we parsed down this massive task into something much more manageable that we could say, yeah, we can sink our teeth into that and fix it. And it needs to be the same with saving the planet. Saving the planet's too big of a goal. It's a good goal, but it's too big. So breaking it down into much smaller pieces that we can say, yeah, that's a dragon I can slay. I can tackle that today and get it done. And then we'll move on to the next thing.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's it's hard to look at it like that. That people will actually move forward on one specific item to try to get that accomplished. It seems like it's such a big task to get all of this done that people are, like you said, kind of throw their hands up in the air. It's pretty frustrating. Have you read the book The Overstory?
No, I haven't.
I read it a few years ago, and honestly, it's really stuck with me. It was like this Pulitzer Prize-winning book of literary fiction, and I normally stay away from those books because they're just too dense for my brain. And I tried this one, and it was so beautiful. And like I don't think I'll ever be able to look at a forest or a tree again the same way as I did before that book. Like for me, looking at climate and nature, there's like pre-Overstory and post-Overstory. And I think you being in it, I think you'd really appreciate it, because me just thinking of like some of the lowest hanging fruit, and this is almost trivial, that like I don't understand why when we bury people after they've passed away, what we're doing it that we need to cut down trees to create caskets to put people in the ground. Like it's the dumbest thing that I've ever heard of. And like, this is such an easy thing for us to solve, and it would allow us to, like, our bodies to feed the earth and all of these things, instead of we have this gigantic box of wood in the, like, there are such pragmatic things to do. And yeah, like how do people in organizations, and how are you organizing people around this to actually give them a target to fire arrows at right now?
It's, and to your point a second ago, and this is something you touched on earlier as well, it's tradition. And that might be a cultural tradition, it might be a religious tradition, but those are the things that are holding us back. These are the things, the way things have always been. There's that book, and I'm going to butcher the title, but it's what got you here won't get you there. That sort of idea, which is what's holding us back in so many different ways. And certainly capitalism is a big one that falls under that, but that's a different conversation for a different day. I just hope there is some brilliant mind somewhere out there figuring out a new system. But while we have capitalism, let's work within it to make it as good as possible if we can. So yes, but to your question, the boring term for it is called materiality. It's a financial term that the sustainability world has stolen, but basically it's helping organizations figure out of the million things that you need to do, the million critical things at the top of the list, what are the actual 3 to 5 things that you can A, have a massive impact on in the short term, and B, do genuinely need to focus on? Because as we all know, if you try to do everything, you're going to accomplish nothing. And that's what's happened with a lot of businesses thus far. So we help them to focus on 3 or 5 issues. And I know for a lot of people listening, you're probably thinking, but these businesses need to, they need to do so much more than 3 or 5 things. And yes, they do. But it's better they get 3 or 5 things done now than get nothing done for a long time. So that's how we get them to really get the ball rolling and focus on those things, solve those small, or they're usually not small problems, but that small set of problems. And then, like I mentioned a second ago, move on to the next thing. And that actually does create a lot of forward momentum and great progress versus just sitting around for another 20 years doing nothing. That's how we do it. And it's the same thing for individuals too. Yeah. And in my first book, Sustainability for the Rest of Us, I have this section that talks about, and I don't know who told me this, I didn't make this up, but I heard it somewhere. You can do anything, but you cannot do everything. I think that's so important because, time, capacity, sanity, these are all limited resources. We're only one individual. Yeah. So especially for those of us that care, you go outside, and every time I walk outside, I want to adopt every stray dog, feed every homeless person. On the weekends, I want to go, and read to the elderly and give my money to every charity that I see. Where's that going to leave me? If I try to do all those things, I'll be exhausted and I'll be broke, and I won't be able to bring, myself to actually accomplish anything at all. So I always tell people, pick that thing that you're most passionate about, that thing that you either have a passion for, you're specialized in, a special skill, or if you're financially well off, congratulations, something you can contribute money to, because that helps things a lot as well. And focus on those things and be confident in the knowledge there are billions of other people that will pick up where you might not be able to. You don't have to do it all yourself. And I think by thinking of things that way, we actually bring more of ourselves to accomplishing the goals that we set.
I was thinking of something as you're talking about your conversations with businesses and some of the things that they could do, and I kind of had a point of where I connected to how you're describing the UN before, whereas maybe it's just important that there are more sustainability advisors like yourself that are at least starting these conversations and being in the room to so there isn't these isolated companies that are just thinking they can do whatever they want, that it's creating this groundswell. And I wonder if there would be a benefit of creating a UN of sustainability for organizations, where there would be a 200-person committee or whatever, based on smaller cap, maybe B Corp sort of companies, than these giant companies. And so at least once quarterly or once every 6 months, there's these conversations where someone like yourself or someone that's thinking about an important issue can go beyond or go before this council and say, this is what we're looking at, this is what's really important, and we think that everyone here should appoint a commissioner within GM or within, I'm not going to say a bank because we know that's ridiculous, but but more of these other larger companies to see you guys need to start making a difference in these areas. Do you think there would be some merit in that?
It's starting to happen, but it doesn't really get a whole lot of PR because it's a relatively new thing. Interestingly enough, I think it's goal 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's one of them, is around this idea of collaborative partnerships and bringing industries and players within industries together to talk through their solutions, to hold one another accountable. These things are happening, but again, it's quite slow. Interestingly, when it comes to sustainability, a lot of the solutions that are out there, they're industry agnostic. So it doesn't matter if you're in automotive or you're in food. The solution is probably somewhere. So, there's no reason at this stage of the game to reinvent the wheel because the solution has probably been found. The last thing we need are more solutions. We don't need any more solutions. We got them all. What we need now is getting companies to actually implement the solutions that we have. If you see a company saying, oh, we've discovered this groundbreaking thing, or we're coming up with a new process for this, or we've developed a technology for that, that's greenwashing because the solution already exists somewhere. They're just trying to make a name for themselves. So ignore it. It's now at the point where we need them to do the things that we already know they should do. And those collaborative initiatives, those partnerships, that's a great way to do it. We just need to get those really ramped up and firing on all cylinders. But I like the idea of a UN for sustainability. Maybe I could be the Secretary General.
Yeah, let me know. We'll do it together. I'm on board.
Perfect.
The one thing I wanted to save this question for last, because whenever I have someone on where I'm talking about sustainability, I feel like it gets to this point, and so I always want to address it. Is the answer not at the end of the line that there are just too many of us? That there's just so many, the population is just so out of control. It's still going up. We have this pro-natalist sort of society we live in that it's not. If you don't decide to have kids, then there's something wrong with you. If it we're slowly moving the needle a little bit, but there's fucking too many of us everywhere. Is that not it?
Thank you for bringing this up. This is the not dirty little secret, but it's the taboo subject that nobody wants to talk about. So in Sustainability for the Rest of Us, I have a section on big sustainability myths, these things that we think are making a difference that probably aren't, and then sort of, going in that direction. And I asked the question, and this is a spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't read it, what is the one thing you can do to really save the planet? What's the number one thing? Is it recycling? Is it, not taking your private jet to go get the mail like the Kardashians do? All of those things are great, but at the end of the day, the number one thing that we can all do is have fewer children. I'm not starting the John Pabon eugenics program. I'm not saying no kids. I'm saying one fewer child per family makes such a difference. And of course it does, because we're resource intensive animals. We're like they said on, what was it? It was The Matrix, where they say we're sort of a cancer in a lot of ways on society because we take and we don't give. And it's true. And the stats back it up, where over the course of one's lifetime, if you're not on this earth, you're using a lot fewer resources than if you are and you're going vegan, if you are and you don't drive, if you are and you don't travel. Right. Obviously, because there's one fewer human being. So yes, the one thing that we should be doing is having fewer children. The one solution to this all is to stop having kids and to stop repopulating the earth. Now, within the context of that, and to frame it a bit, we're talking from, I'm in Australia, you're in Spain, we're both, from North America, so we're in a privileged position where we can say that. In parts of the developing world, that's not the case. It's very, very different. And I think with all things sustainability, we have to be very careful to separate what goes on in the developed traditional North and the developing or the global South. And this is where this idea of intersectionality comes into sustainability, which is not really a thing we talk about too much, but that the impacts of climate change and the need for sustainability and building a better future are going to affect different people around the world in different ways, different groups of people and segments in different ways, and then our responsibility, depending where we are in the world and what class we're in and all of these sort of factors, what we do to save the planet is also going to be very different. It's going to look very different. So we cannot expect, and this is to one of the points you raised earlier, we cannot expect people in India to be contributing to saving the planet as much as we can somebody that's sitting in a villa in Malibu, right? It's very different things.
Right.
Because they're at different stages of, either countries are at different stages of human development. So we cannot expect everybody to be contributing to this fight equally. That doesn't mean that it gets anybody off the hook of doing their part. Everybody needs to do their part, but that's going to look very, very different. So if your part is having one fewer child, please do, because that is going to go so far to helping everybody else out. Thank you for bringing that up. That is something that we don't talk about very often, but it's so true.
Oh, thank you for acknowledging it, because like I feel crazy around a lot of people because they're like, well, what do you mean? We're just not supposed to have kids? Yeah, that's exactly what I mean.
and in this, why would you want? Like, let's be honest. Why would you want to, in this dumpster fire of a world we're in? Why would you want to bring a human up in it? But that's just my perspective, and I'm too selfish. And the economics don't make sense, but that's just me.
Well, hold on. I'm going to let you off the hook for the selfish comment, because like I think there's no bigger point of like selfish behavior than bringing a human into your the world that looks like you, that you can raise to be like you. So maybe you can have a friend that obeys you. Like it's fucking ridiculous. And I listen. I love kids. I'm a big fan of like family values and all of these things, but we can hold these things in our mind at the same time. Like, your kids are lovely, your family is lovely, but this world is being destroyed by us who are using more than our fair share, because it's just who we are. Like, in our DNA, we have to consume to stay alive, and waste is kind of part of the species. Like, I mean, your point about the cancer or human, I don't know if the Matrix was they're a cancer or they're a virus, but I know in different movies they said similar things. And I had this conversation with a friend of mine, and he's like, I fucking hate this point that, fine, if you think we're a cancer, then why don't you just go and kill yourself? And I'm like, man, this is the exact point. I don't want to kill myself. And my programming is that I want to reproduce and see my genes move on and all of these things. So like, we can have the conversation without me saying like, okay, the answer is that I'm going to jump off a cliff. It's people's brains really break. So I appreciate having the conversation with someone that can like hold two opposing thoughts in their head at the same time, because we're also quite like duplicitous, dichotomous beings at the same time. Like, that's also part of our nature. So absolutely. I'm glad these conversations seem to be happening. So I guess I want to be respectful of your time, you being on the other side of the earth here. What are some of like the lowest hanging fruits, like obviously aside from like, not having kids and all that, but that we can do sustainability wise individually?
I think, and had you asked me that question even a year or 2 years ago, I would have laughed at my response now, but it's grown on me. And my response is to really speak with your wallet. And I can't believe I say that. It makes me cringe sometimes when I say it, but it's so true. And I don't know why I didn't have this epiphany before, especially working with businesses all the time. Of course, speaking with your wallet makes sense, because businesses will listen to that. So that is the number one thing. And I think the thing we have the most control over as individuals is to really be conscious consumers. Question, do you need what you're about to purchase, or is it an impulse buy? Have you done your research into what that company really stands for? Are you going to be proud to consume or to wear whatever you're buying from that company? And yes, I know I say do some research and people go, oh my God, and they roll their eyes. I get that. But again, that's the stage of things that we're at right now, where we have to do research. In 10 years' time, we won't need to do that anymore, because all companies will kind of be good companies. But for now, do your research. There are plenty of amazing resources. One of the ones, and I'm not paid, so this is not a promo, but one of the ones I always recommend people, especially when it comes to fashion, is a website called goodonu.eco. They've done an amazing job of basically pulling every single fashion brand that exists, from fast fashion all the way up to the big French houses, and grading them critically on their environmental, social, and governance performance. They pull no punches. They do a great job. And that is a perfect resource for when you're shopping to say, yep, I've looked at this company. It's all there. It's really easy to just type in a name. You just do a Google search and you can make a conscious, informed decision. That's what we want people to do, is make a conscious, informed decision in all aspects of their life. And we have, like we were talking about a minute ago, access to information. So instead of watching cat videos, use it to your benefit. and the benefit of the planet.
Right. That's great. Good on you. Like, would you happen to know anyone in this like fashion activism like world that I could speak to? Because I've been trying to look for someone to get on the pod to speak about how terrible fashion is for the planet, and I can't get anybody.
No, I'm happy to connect you with somebody. She's in Italy and she does amazing stuff. I'm connected with her on TikTok, and I'm gonna pat myself on the back for a sec. I made a little bit of a name for myself on TikTok about 8 months ago because of this, and I don't know if you
Yeah.
saw it, but the Shein influencer trip. Where basically she and the Chinese fast fashion brand brought a bunch of North American influencers over to their factories and had them do a big PR
Right.
push that was all greenwashing. So because of that, I ended up
Wow.
getting connected with a lot of people that are actually in the fashion space. I am not in the fashion space, but all of that to say, I'll connect you with somebody.
Right. Yeah, that would be great. And no, I've still avoided getting TikTok because I've heard how addictive it can be, and
It's
I'm
it's a
I'm bad enough
great.
with Instagram as it is.
Oh, that's
So,
fair. Yeah, I don't do any dancing, so don't expect that. But it's a great place to share information long form.
oh man. Okay. Well, thanks so much for all your insights and non-dancing your way into our TikTok sustainability hearts. Yeah, I really appreciate all that you're doing and the insight you've given me, and for being here today. It means a lot.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. It was great having this really good conversation, especially about the fewer children. Thank you.
So thanks for listening to No More, No Less. I appreciate the time you spent with me today. So please subscribe and rate the show if you enjoyed it. It'll help me create more amazing content and get that next little bit of validation that I so deeply crave. If you didn't enjoy it, well, that sucks. But to make sure, I think you should listen to my next 10 episodes and then decide. I mean, come on. Rome was not built in a day. I'm just getting warmed up here, guys. So thanks again. See you next time.